will absolutely be in the final, besides the fact that we'll be dealing with this diagrammatically and equation, linear equation-wise, on this upcoming exam for around 20 marks. There'll be questions about it. If you look through the various final exams of the multiple choice, I think 10 of them out of 50 are probably on monopoly, or very close to 10. It's really disproportionately represented. And whatever little bit that we do will probably have something, i.e. our own questions, about something on monopoly. That's great, and it's not great because we did monopoly first before the exam, and some people just disappeared because it wasn't going to be in the exam. Then we did efficiency after the exam. Of course, some people weren't here. So if you didn't happen to make it to those lectures and you didn't happen to do that, you need to catch up. That's all there is to it. That's all there is to it. I believe after the exam we did the beginnings of efficiency, and I'll take off from there. Okay? So, I'm not going to, what we have to do, it's easy for me to just ramble on about all sorts of interesting things about this stuff, but I got to hold myself in check so that we can try to get monopoly and efficiency externalities and efficiency in foreign trade done within the next couple of hours and have some time for comparative advantage. Okay, so, but let's just get an overview of where we're going, everybody. First of all, we talked about what it means for an efficient, optimal society. Distinguish between productive efficiency, this is the last time we met, approximately 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago maybe. We talked about we reminded ourselves of productive efficiency as demonstrated by our production possibilities curve shows the maximum output for given inputs. Production possibility. Every point in a production possibility curve is productively efficient. How do we choose between them? That becomes our question now. That is called allocative efficiency. Allocative efficiency assumes productive efficiency, but it's the optimal allocation of resources to give society what society wants. Okay, what does society want? How are we going to measure that? It turns out essentially we measure it by price. And i.e. the demand function. The demand function tells us how society values a unit, an extra unit. Somebody would pay $10 for this extra unit, somebody would pay $6, whatever it is. So the demand function determines what society is willing to pay. Now, I talked a little bit about Adam Smith, I think last day Marshall and Pareto. Did I not? Eric, you might remember, yeah. I'm going to cut to the chase of that, but basically what we get is this idea. The competitive market gives the optimal allocation of resources. From Smith, because everybody gets to, pursues their own best interests, they get to use their resources in any way they want, as long as you have free movement of factors, competition, so price is driven to cost, and self-interest assumed, and of course rationality, but I didn't mention that. The competitive market will adjust. Now, Smith doesn't talk about the price mechanism. He talks about the movement of factors, labor, capital, and land to get a higher return. It's that movement to a higher return that gives the optimal allocation of resources at competitive equilibrium. If you said to Smith, what have you got there? He would have said, well, optimal allocation is where you're producing at cost and you're paying that price, the price of cost. If there's a distinction between price and cost, that's monopoly. If price equals cost, that's competitive equilibrium, right? Prices are pushed to cost. But of course then, what cost? He wouldn't even think about Adam Smith. Should we have average cost, average variable cost, marginal cost, average fixed cost? What cost? Total cost? So we get Marshall. Marshall, if you remember, has this demand function, which is derived somewhat differently than ours, but essentially ours. A supply function that at one level is the quantity supplied at a given price, but then we find out that the supply function is really the marginal cost function of the firm, at least in competition. And then we find out that through the price mechanism, surplus, shortage, price rising and falling, we go to a competitive equilibrium. And then, to cut to the chase, Marshall is very much into maximizing utility. He's into maximizing the welfare of humanity, of the society. So essentially he says, We want to maximize surplus. Consumer surplus in his day, he didn't actually talk a lot about producer surplus, but adding producer surplus, you maximize surplus. Guess what? That happens where demand intersects supply. Well, what is true then? Well, demand intersects supply, it's competitive equilibrium, but what does that mean? It means price equals marginal cost. So, notice our rules up until now. Competitive equilibrium, price demanded equals price supplied, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Competition, price taking, all the courses in these basic ideas. Consumer equilibrium, marginal rate of substitution equals minus px over py. Firm equilibrium, in particular monopoly equilibrium, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Competitive equilibrium, price equals marginal cost. Long run competitive equilibrium, price equals minimum average cost, which also equals marginal cost, don't forget. And now, optimal allocation of resources, having nothing to do with that, but derived in this way to say the optimal allocation of resources occurs where price equals marginal cost. Oh, by the way, that is competitive equilibrium. Then once again, competitive equilibrium is the best of all possible worlds. It gives us that optimal allocation of resources. Marshall. Come back to that. Now it turns out, interestingly, but again, price must equal cost, but cost is understood as marginal cost. So just remember that. When I say what is efficiency, like a machine, you go where price equals marginal cost. That's the way it is. All right. But Marshall pointed out, and I point this out to you, is because we discussed this to some degree, but not hugely. This is true. Competitive equilibrium in the marketplace gives the optimal allocation of resources, except Marshall points out two problems. Number one, demand is corrupted by the money factor, the diminishing marginal utility of money in his terms, by the income effect in our terms. And Marshall says, therefore, for any given competitive equilibrium, you could probably improve the welfare of society by a redistribution of income from the rich to the poor. Now think about that for a moment. That's a pretty shocking statement for a guy who's basically writing about capitalism. But it wasn't shocking to him, but it's shocking to a lot of modern economists. We'll come back to that. So, number one, Marshall points out that the competitive equilibrium in the marketplace would be the optimal allocation of resources if you had some optimal distribution of income, which you may not have. So it's not. Competitive equilibrium is not necessarily the optimal allocation of resources if a redistribution of income could create a better welfare for society. So that's one point. A second one is, we're going to see that Marshall points out, that competitive equilibrium does not necessarily give the lowest price and the maximum output. That happens with natural monopolies, it turns out. A natural monopoly is better. So I could actually flat out say, a natural monopoly gives a better allocation of resources than competitive equilibrium, which is a shocking statement. But again, it is flat out true. There's probably some qualifications that have to make. But for most people, they never get to that until Marshall said that in 1890. The idea wasn't picked up until the 1930s. And many economists still talk as, and you will see our analysis proceeds as, natural monopolies don't exist, but they do exist. Electricity generation, nuclear power plants and the like. Telephones, cell phones, natural gas. Any industry where the sort of fixed costs of the industry are so large that there's only one room for one firm. The optimally sized firm is bigger than the marketplace. We'll come to that. Then a third one. Now it turns out Marshall was writing all this stuff in 1890. And he was at Cambridge University, and down the hall was a guy named Pigou, P-I-G-O-U. So basically what I'm pointing out to you here is the essence of modern micro, its foundation by Marshall, and it hasn't much changed since then, is simultaneously the understanding of the weakest point of modern micro, the claim that competitive markets optimally allocate resources, and that is the concept of externalities. We'll talk about that. So basically this class is about optimal allocation of resources, and we'll talk for a minute. I'm going to stop and ask you this question, because this is the kind of thing you're going to hear in the world we live in by politicians, economists, and all the rest. In fact, our mayor might say this, if our mayor, this is way too sophisticated concept for our mayor. He couldn't put together this idea in any way, shape, or form. But I'm going to ask you this simple question. Is it true, therefore, that free markets optimally allocate resources? Yes or no? Yes or no? Do free markets optimally allocate resources? And the answer is no. Why not? What did I say was the optimal allocation of resources? What?
Natural monopolies.
No, forget that for the moment. That's an insight, but it's not the main line of attack. What is supposedly the best system ever that optimally allocates resources? Competitive markets. That's the story, competitive markets. Because competitive markets give P equals MC, either through Pareto. I didn't mention Pareto. Pareto is all trade until someone is worse off than you stop. Pareto gives you the optimal allocate, the same result as Marshall, but it doesn't say anything about income distribution. Therefore, so far as modern economics is concerned, it's probably better because it shoves aside that whole problem of the distribution of income. Okay, competitive markets, why? Free markets also have what? If you have a free market, everyone can do what you want, what happens with some markets? Do you guys just see competitive firms in the world? Is that all you ever see? Is that all that exists in the world?
Artificial monopolies.
Well, not just artificial, any kind of monopoly. Monopolies do not give the optimal allocation of resources, except if they're natural monopolies, but forget that for the moment. They simply supposedly don't. And that is the big problem. Monopolies don't, so free markets don't. And again, I say to you, economics says that firms maximize profits. That's what they care for. That's all they care for. They're like devouring sharks. They want to maximize profit. Profits are not maximized in competitive equilibrium. If you become a manager and all you can do is operate competitively, you're a totally useless manager. Every manager is good at anything needs to create a type of monopoly. Think of beer. How many people can actually distinguish between beer? Beer this, beer that. How many people can actually distinguish between Pepsi, Cola, Coca-Cola, blah, blah, blah. But the whole, I can, yes, that's true. Yeah, but not everybody can. I mean, who cares, ultimately, right? How many people can distinguish between various types of jeans? But every single manufacturer, we're Coke. We're a monopoly. We're the only ones who produce Coke. They produce Pepsi Cola. We're the only ones who produce this type of beer. They produce another type of beer. If you can convince the public of that, you get a higher profit than a competitive profit. Jeans. Do all jeans sell at $20? No. This jean guest sells for whatever. DKNY sells for this. This other type of jean sells for that. All of them claiming you walk in, you're paying $200 for a pair of jeans, which costs $30 to make. Because they can pass off that they are a monopoly. We're the only people who produce these jeans, right? So the game is to be a monopoly. All firms want to monopolize in some fashion or another because that is the maximization of profits, and we say that's what drives the system. So it turns out a free market, think of Russia when they collapsed after the Soviet Union, that sure as heck is in a competitive market. That, naturally, as it were, went to monopolistic behavior. So again, free markets mean nothing. Competitive markets mean everything, number one. So our rule is competitive markets are the optimal allocators of resources, but in fact they aren't. If there's an income effect, if you think of Marshall, but don't worry about that if you're thinking of Pareto. If there's natural monopolies, if there's externalities, and that's where we're going, okay? So then the thing is, we want to control monopolies. Last day, I believe we did, at the end of that day, we did a normal monopoly, and we talked about marginal cost pricing. So everybody know, I'll just reference a couple of things in your history. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I could easily do it, but I don't want to. It just takes so much time. We want to, everybody basically agrees a non-natural monopoly is bad news. They charge a higher price and have a lower output than competitive firms. Therefore, there's an efficiency loss. In fact, I'll just run through that quickly to remind you and a couple of things, okay? So let's just do that. 1 minute is going to enter standby mode. Okay. So what? All right. Here we go. Get with it. Okay, let's leave it there. Now you need to pay attention to this. This stuff, you know, is the death of many people in this class. Guess what? It's not difficult. Everything that's a diagram here is not difficult. You can do the diagram. Just think logically. And you can practice. As I say to you, can you imagine if you actually have to sit and pore over a book and read it and figure out what's going on? There's no excuse for not knowing how to do every one of these diagrams and understanding everything. Basically, I could sit, if I could be like some kind of little devil on your shoulder when you went home, as you're on the subway saying, draw that diagram, do it again and again and again. By the time you got home today, if you had a half an hour's commute, you would know everything practically. Literally. If you didn't get it to read your notes, bang, you got it. Then do it again. And think of it logically. People don't do well. You're doing well in this class, but people don't do well in normative classes. They don't do this stuff. And then at the last minute, they start reading the notes and try to memorize. That's not the way to do it, right? So you want to understand this. And we laboriously talked about cost functions and production functions and all that junk, understood the cost functions, worked our way through competitive equilibrium, short and long run, and then bang, monopoly. And today I'll just go up and down and all around. You got to follow, right? Because you're supposed to understand. So here we go. It's all in the notes. Watch. This one, just watch. Don't try to copy. We'll keep up. Okay, so I give you an exam question, perhaps on this exam, perhaps on the final exam, 10 marks. I say to you, this won't be here. The diagram below shows the average cost of monopoly and the demand in the industry. Show me monopoly equilibrium. Now everybody, even though you've been away for 2 weeks, can you all say what the formula for monopoly equilibrium is, just by the way? Should I go through you one by one? You can, that's like attendance. I think you probably know it. What is the formula for monopoly equilibrium? Yes. Oh, you poor fellow. You do look like you've lost some brain cells. Absolutely. Okay, go ahead. What is it? The rest of you, bang, bang. Like, this is the thing. I'm not being critical, but I mean, imagine. Here's a word for you, elephant. It's a big creature, it has a long nose, blah, blah, blah. Would you forget that in 2 weeks? You know, elephant. And that's a lot of letters. I just said, what? What is the solution? What is the story? Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Da, 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 da. How can you forget that? Mr. equals Ms., except it's Mick, right? It's not Ms. Because no Mr. equals a Ms. They're not exactly the same. Right, here we go. So, here we have MR equals MC. Now I know people forget this, but really if you think about it, it's insane. You know, you would say, if I could go to a place where people are senile, like I can say, hey, here's what you need to remember next time they're drooling. Remember MR equals MC. I come back a week later, oh yeah, I remember that. Nothing else. Okay, so here we go. MR, twice the slope, bisects the space. MR equals 0, half the way between here and here. There's MR. Marginal cost, going through minimum average cost. Is it like that? Not likely. Is it like, no, somewhere in here, don't worry about it. Bang. Okay, then, what is, this tells us where they intersect the quantity that maximizes profit, which gives us, given that quantity, they work together, of course, there's the price. So there's PM and QM. Now this is a normal monopoly in the sense that there is room in this industry for more firms like this. In fact, if I took this firm, this is the optimally sized firm. I could take this firm and another firm, if it was competition, could enter this industry and it would be producing, notice, this amount, then again, and then we could have another one, right? Like this. In competitive equilibrium, we could probably get to competitive equilibrium minimum average cost with 3 firms. But this is a monopoly. Firms can't enter because of control over some input or a patent or whatever it is. Okay, good. What is the economic profit and loss? Very important, average cost. You find that anyway, like that. There's the average cost identified. There's the economic profit and loss, right there. All right? Monopoly profit. Okay, now then, so far so good. What is the optimal allocation of resources? What is the optimal allocation of resources? Where P equals MC. Where is that? Demand represents the price line. This thing here, of course, is MC. Now, MC, for the monopoly, is supply for competition. Monopolies do not have supply functions. Why is that? Because the supply function is a quantity response to a price. Monopolies aren't price takers, and besides which, their output is not determined by marginal cost alone, but by marginal revenue, right? They don't have supply functions. This is not a supply function. Okay, but in this industry, this is the marginal cost of the monopoly. This is supply of competition. Competitive equilibrium would be right here, but it's also MC equals MP. There. This okay, there, this is, I'm going to call it P star. Now everybody, this is competitive equilibrium, P star. If there were competitive equilibrium in the short run, that's what it would be. Now we could show you, like, this is a single plant monopolist. I could show you, cartel and all that kind of stuff. But we're not going to. This would make it, to show you the difference between competition and monopoly. So there it is. This is the optimal allocation of resources. Ta-da! So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. What is the efficiency loss due to monopoly? Well, what is it? It's measurable, everybody. Now, you say, the good thing about this theory is, for example, I'm going to look at the efficiency loss to society. What does society lose because there's a monopoly? And we say, it loses, we measure that by the difference between optimal output, 0 efficiency loss right here, and the efficiency loss of all the units of output not produced in this case. The difference between demand, what it's worth to society, and the marginal cost of it, what society pays for them. Look, this says, basically the sum of society is willing to pay $30, say, for this item. And it costs society, let us say, $15 to produce that unit. Why don't we produce it? It's worth $30 to somebody, and it costs us $15. So we produce all that stuff. The measure of efficiency loss is the difference between what's worth to society, measured by price, and the marginal cost. Or the difference between, because it can happen also on this side, we'll see later, between marginal cost and that. So, this triangle here is the efficiency loss due to monopoly, right? Because it's always a triangle, it's sometimes called the welfare loss triangle. Alright? Okay. Now one of the things, just cutting to the chase, it turns out, without this triangle here is the net producer surplus and consumer surplus loss. One thing I just want to show you, get this out of the way, is you'll notice, by the way, if I drew the loss in consumer surplus due to monopoly, it would be this area here. Do you agree? Above the price line for competition, between the price line for competition, the price line for monopoly. This is the consumer surplus loss due to monopoly. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is the monopolist gets part of this as a profit. This part right here is the gain that the monopolists get as a profit. It's the change in producer surplus. Down here, this is producer surplus, right? Right up to here for the new monopolist. This is in addition to the monopolist producer surplus. But it's a loss of consumer surplus. Now, interestingly enough, this is an analysis of the efficiency loss to society. And as such, we don't care about income distribution. We don't care if the monopolist gains and the consumer loses, because there's no loss to society. Now he is sitting here, because he didn't know MC equals MR, I'm going to punish him by taking this away from him, just like this. What is the loss to society by me taking this away from him? What is the loss to society? Nothing. Society didn't lose anything. It just distributed from him to me, right? We never lost a thing. He lost, so what? But that's the point. This is never an issue about income distribution. It is, so the interesting thing, now think about this for a moment. I was just giving some of this as an example, maybe you're not sure. Say University of Toronto sells Coke at $1 and the students buy every day, every week, 10,000 Coke. Everybody? Good. Suppose now the university gives a monopoly to Coke in a way that nobody else can compete with them. So they charge a price of $1.50 and only 8,000 people buy Coke. Now if I said to any student, what is the problem with monopoly? They'd say, I have to pay more for the Coke I buy. It turns out that has nothing to do with it. If you buy the Coke, it's not an issue, right? Basically, if I'm one of the 8,000 people, one of the people who buys those 8,000 cans, I pay an extra 50 cents and the monopoly gets the extra 50 cents. There's no cost lost to society. So it turns out what most people think is the cost of monopoly, that is, the people who buy, it costs them more, is irrelevant. What is the loss to society? It is the surplus on the goods that aren't produced, right? So this is again this is called the dead weight loss. It is flat out lost. Nobody gets it. This part here, taken from consumers, given to monopolists. This part, loss of consumer surplus and loss of producer surplus here, this is just gone. Nobody gets it because we don't produce those units. Everybody? So again, I say, the standard person would say it's the higher price because I have to pay more. But the correct answer is it's the loss of surplus. That is the efficiency loss on the goods that are not produced. Okay, good. And then the next thing is, how do we regulate such a monopoly? Now, watch. Suppose I imposed a per unit tax like this. All right. Now, by the way, everybody, it would also entail, of course, a shift up of the average cost function to something like whatever I brought. Okay? Shift straight up. I'm not sure if that's straight up, it doesn't even matter. This is a per unit tax. We don't want the monopolies producing too little. Let's tax them. Will this reduce efficiency loss? Well, actually it won't, you'll notice. Now remember, don't look at the efficiency. What does the monopoly produce now? If you tax them, now the monopoly doesn't produce here. They produce here. If marginal cost is shoved up because of the tax, the monopoly charges a higher price and produces less. This is worse, right? Now some people might look here and say, well, this is the efficiency loss. No, it isn't. We've got to look at the original marginal cost, because that's the one that really counts. We don't count a government tax as being real. It's just real to change the monopoly. So a per unit, again, notice on the exam, you might be asked this question. What happens if you tax, per unit tax in a monopoly? You raise price, you decrease quantity, you increase efficiency loss. Doesn't work, right? What about if you did something different? What about if we had a flat, a fixed tax? Let's toss that in here. So that might be something like this. We might actually say, do it so we end up something like this, just whatever, right? That's a fixed tax. Does this change efficiency loss? Does a fixed tax change efficiency loss due to monopoly? Well, you know the answer. What is it? What is it? What defines efficiency loss? What defines monopoly output? Marginal cost equals marginal revenue. If the fixed cost changes, does it change monopoly output? Yes or no?
No.
No, because it doesn't change marginal cost. So we can't tax a monopoly. Can't be done. So the way that monopolies are regulated is through regulatory agencies. We don't have as many now as we once did, but we used to have